Good morning. Good morning. It's telling me I'm live. Let me quickly check. Doesn't usually lie to me. There we are. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me. It's a cold Alberta morning for me. I'm bundled up a bit and we're trying to get the furnace going because it's cold in the trailer. But welcome very much. Welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining. And I gotta apologize to YouTube. Look, I think I knew when I was pushing that play button on that Johnny Depp video that probably wasn't going to be a good day for me with YouTube, and it wasn't. So they took down the stream from yesterday. But don't worry, I'm not striked. I'm not in trouble or anything like that. It's a copyright claim. I will be re-uploading yesterday's stream without the wonderful music of Johnny Depp, and then everybody can then go ahead and enjoy the replays. So YouTube, I learned my lesson. I won't be playing music again. They did let me know that I could have muted it. I could have played the video, just not the audio. So lesson learned for this guy out in cold Alberta morning, and I'll make sure I don't do that again. I do, however, have a video I can play for you, and it is the recap of day 4. So once again, Christine from the Canadian Constitution Foundation has done a wonderful job, and she's broken down her opinion and her take on how she saw the position of the witnesses and the questioning. And once again, she did an excellent job. I do have a couple critiques, so I'll save that till the end, but here you go. Enjoy, and I'll be right back and trying to get that furnace going. Thank you very much.
Hi there. Thanks for staying up to date by subscribing to this channel.
I do recommend you subscribe to her channel. She's a wonderful source for information, and she's 100% right at the end there too. It's a lot of work doing these videos. I sympathize with her tremendously. And just like she's doing, I'm going to be working and listening at the same time because this is 6 weeks, and I'm going to have my other obligations continue to move forward as I'm continuing to bring the stream to you. The couple points that I didn't fully agree with on her, of course, I agree with basically everything except for she didn't challenge why the Mayor Watson was not aware of the Emergency Act, being the mayor, being in the provincial government before. His entire career is around being able to understand government policies, and I'm sure very complicated ones. And when he was working in the provincial government, he would have been exposed to the provincial level emergency acts as well, and those are tied to the national one. So I'm not saying he was hiding anything, but she didn't challenge why he wouldn't have known that. And then she did dwell a bit on the threats to the mayor. We didn't really hear about that before until testimony yesterday, and I don't think it's really relevant that somebody may or may not have driven out there with an intention. But I think maybe where she was going with that was to highlight that no matter what was going on, there were existing laws that were in place to be able to handle it. And a lot of talk about Mr. Ayotte. He was a great witness, in my opinion, because he was very honest in what he had to say. He did mention that it was common practice to define a red zone around all protests in Ottawa. And it is policy not to have the bylaw officers enter the red zone because in any protest and in any situation, it could be heated. And this was an existing policy before the convoy entered the city. So this event was no different when it came to red zone having exclusion policy in place for bylaw officers. However, what was different with this one was outside of the red zone, we've heard testimony that bylaw officers were instructed to handle the situation differently based on whether they presumed it was related to the protest or not. So if a call came in and said it was a vehicle that had Canadian flag on it, it would be routed to the police, the OPS, instead of bylaw. But if it was something else that would typically be bylaw, it would go to them. We even saw an email where there was concern about the messaging on the phone system. I believe it was for 311. If this is a COVID-related issue, please contact bylaw. And then bylaw had an issue with that because COVID-related issues, it would be hard to distinguish them from the protesters. So from the very, very early, it seemed like inside the red zone, there was always a bylaw officer exclusion policy in place. However, outside the red zone, there was a new one for this particular event. And as Christine says at the end of her video, the main question here and why we're at this inquiry is to find out whether or not there were existing laws that would have covered the issues. Because if there is, as you pointed out, there is no justification for the Emergencies Act. In fact, it's a requirement, Emergencies Act, that there is no other laws existing that can handle the issue. And as she also pointed out, this power is tremendous for the federal government to have. This is why we have to be careful with it. This is why we have to make sure we only pull it out when we need to, because it does give them dictatorial power. Basically, they by just by a signature by the prime minister or deputy cabinet members, we can have a new law, a new rule. And the banks found that out pretty quick, didn't they? They had to freeze accounts because they were told to. One thing I do want to hopefully we talk about a bit in this inquiry is the government's views on the ability to hand out immunity, especially without a judge involved and without some sort of decision on whether or not it should apply. The government's ability to immune people from the law that they're creating, it seems very intuitive to me, very unproductive. Why should you have the ability to create laws and then have the ability to pause that law when you need it, especially without judicial review? So one of the things I hope will come out of this in the recommendations is going forward, immunity from prosecution, no matter what level, has to be judicially reviewed. And I would actually recommend that anything on the federal level or anything associated with an emergency act or anything on those levels, it has to be a 3-judge panel so that we can try and get at least an impartial judicial review of it. Because I think giving the government the ability to give them the power to give immunity at all to the banks, I think that was a mistake. It also put the banks into a position that was very uncomfortable for them, which was, well, does the immunity actually apply? Because the Emergencies Act was stopped at the Senate level. So I wonder if there's questions around whether or not it applied. Should they have waited until the Senate approved it? And going forward, what will the recommendation be around governmental immunity? I'm not a fan of it because it gives people a way to get away with what they did. And I think if you have that in your justice system, it actually encourages people to not seek justice. Even on the level where it's a drug dealer that's getting immunity in order to talk about who they're associated with, that should always be judicial reviewed, and whether or not it's in the benefit of the justice system to go ahead with that. I would recommend we go very cautiously with immunity going forward, especially on the federal level. And if we have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And I don't see anything right now. So how do you all think it's going? Do you think the government, because right now we're only seeing the government witnesses, do you think the government is establishing the foundation that will give them the justification to have the Emergencies Act? I think some of the testimony we heard yesterday, and there was a clarification by the commissioner about whether or not the province and the federal government had equal policing obligations in the area. There was a question at the end by the commissioner who basically asked, should it be split between them? Should it be fair? Is this something that they both should be concerned about? And I enjoyed that questioning because what it may have been pulling out in the commissioner's mind was, well, you went from municipal dealing with this and then you went to federal dealing with this. So we heard testimony that on February 14th, the Ottawa Police Services were in charge, and then the Ottawa Police Services shut down the operation of moving the trucks, and then the federal government moved in. In between those two steps, there was no provincial involvement. So the Canadian Constitution Foundation, during their cross-examination, pulled out the fact that, yeah, the province has powers, and the province could have done many things under their emergency provisions. And I think what the commissioner was realizing was they were actually left out. So why didn't the OPP get involved? Why were they not one of the steps before the federal step with RCMP, officers from around the world, and the Emergency Act? So I think the commissioner was getting that question out of his mind. And hopefully he saw the truth there because, yes, it was. The provincial government did have lots of powers. They could have done several things, including the tow truck and traffic. Traffic is 100% with the province. So anything to deal with the roads and the highways. Oh, I just want to mention one thing. They say a lot. They use the word highway a lot. I don't want you to confuse it with what we would traditionally call a highway, which would be, the major roads between cities. But in the Highway Traffic Act, highway means road. Okay, so when they're saying highway, it also means road. It means anywhere you can drive your vehicle. They don't really distinguish roads and streets from highway. So the Highway Traffic Act talks about highway. They use that word a lot, and that's why you'll hear it. All right. Okay, now good news. I got the high quality stream again. I had a bit of a concern this morning. It was acting up, but we got it. So we'll be able to provide that to you today. And I would like, if you have the chance, to go ahead and throw some messages in the live chat. I will get to them. I will be listening to the entire inquiry. So I will be here to make sure that we're getting good information on the banner. And oh, look at that. We got the stream. And let me add it now, because we see our friend Brandon Miller standing right there. Where is you sit? Hey, Brandon. There you are. Oh, he's just walking away. I just missed him. But once again, I am kind of perplexed why it's so empty. I do know of at least one person who wants to be there who is not able to be there. Reached out to me on Twitter, had a media pass, had it revoked. Not going to make any judgment on any of it because I heard his side and I heard other people counter his position. So I'll just leave that up with the press department for making their decision on why they revoked it. However, I would recommend anybody who is frustrated and angry and who are talking about this and are out there, understand that civil discourse is still important. You need to be civil about things. Name calling, egregious name calling, that doesn't help anybody. And you know what I'm talking about. To the person who's hearing this, you don't have to say any of those things. Even if they're true, it still doesn't help you. The name calling is pointless. But to everybody else, both sides who are willing to listen and talk and keep an open mind and hear both sides, that's wonderful. Keep that going. That's going to help us all get through things like this inquiry. Because if you come into this with a closed mind, you're going to leave with a closed mind. If you come into this with an open mind, you're going to have at least more information in there to help you make your own decision. I think the whole purpose of these inquiries, if they're done right, is to disclose a lot of information to everybody so that we have more to work with when we're making our decisions on whether or not we think the government did or didn't overreach. And this will be important in the next election. I think the truth is important, whichever way it goes. And I think Canadians, the more informed they are, the better the voter they are. And that's what I really want at the end of the day. An informed voter is vital in the democratic system. And I'm happy to do what I can to bring this information to all of you. Okay. Yep. So the audio looks good as well. So I think we're going to be good to go soon. They haven't brought out the commissioner. Now today, we'll quickly go over the witnesses that we're expecting today. And we are expecting Councillor Diane Deans. I will let you know they updated the website witness list kind of silently yesterday. So when I had it open at the beginning of the day, Kim Ayet was not on the list, but he is now. And now Diane Deans is listed as the next witness after Kim. Oh, there's Tom Mazzaro right there. And it looks like we're going to be getting ready. And there's the commissioner. So I'm going to be quiet and get this audio.
Good morning, bonjour. Welcome to day whatever. We're going to take a short break. Council have asked to have a few moments to review one piece of evidence before we start. So we're going to take 15 minutes and we'll start at 9:45. And again, I apologize for the delay, but these things.
All right. Well, live live video, live everything means you need to be able to respond to it. Okay, so hey, I'm back. Did you guys miss me? No questions yet? Okay, so let's go ahead and look at Diane Deans. So she's a counselor. Let me pull up some information on her. We got 15 minutes. Actually, put in the chat. You want to see Brendan Miller's opening statement again? Because it helps remind everybody what this is all about and what they actually have to do and prove. It's only a few minutes, so let me go grab that. Because it's a good recap. It's a good reminder of exactly what we have to be looking for in this hearing, this inquiry. All right, I got it. I gotta tell you guys, I'm getting very used to swapping screens and getting used to all this. So hopefully it's an enjoyable experience on your end. And if you're listening on your drive, watch out, be careful. There we go. Let's go full screen and enjoy. It's only a few minutes.
Okay, then I think next we should hear from the convoy organizers who are also involved in the proceedings of the commission.
Good morning. My name is Brendan Miller of Foster LLP, and I am counsel to Freedom Corp, which is an organization that represents the protesters of which attended Ottawa in January and February of 2022. My colleague, Ms. Beth Sheba Vandenberg of Foster LLP, is my co-counsel on this matter, as well as the solicitors of record, both Mr. Keith Wilson, King's Counsel, as well as Ms. Eva Chipiuk, who is counsel to the convoy. With respect to sort of everyone's given an overview of the theory of their case, it is our view that there was no justification whatsoever to invoke the Emergencies Act. The Emergencies Act requires several things. One, it could be invoked due to espionage and sabotage. Are you going to hear any evidence about espionage and sabotage? The answer to that is no. Two, it could be invoked on the basis of clandestine or deceptive foreign influence, a foreign influence that involves a threat to a person. Are you going to hear evidence about that? The answer to that is no. It also could be invoked on the basis of threats or use of acts of serious violence against persons or property. Are you going to hear evidence of violence against persons or property? The answer is no. Lastly, it can also be invoked if there is a group or persons trying to destroy or overthrow by violence the system of government of Canada. Are you going to hear evidence about individuals trying to do that? The answer is no. And the answer is that there was no reasonable and probable grounds to invoke the Emergencies Act, and that the government exceeded their jurisdiction, both constitutionally and legislatively, in doing so. Thank you.
And I agree with all that. So that's the threshold. That's where the government has to go with this. This is what they need to establish. It needs to be clear. It has to be beyond reasonable doubt. It's the highest standard that we have in Canada when it comes to the law. Because as some of you may know, we have different standards. So preponderance of the evidence would be a civil standard, which is just over 51%, more likely than not. Beyond all reasonable doubt would be a criminal standard, which, the name implies reasonable doubt. That's not all doubt. And then for something like this, there has to be no alternate option whatsoever. And it has to be in the face of imminent doom, basically. It has to be beyond all other options. And we've heard a whole whack of testimony already that there were a whole bunch of options already available in place. For example, the agreement with the truckers. We heard, or I won't say the truckers, with the convoy organizers, because they actually had an agreement. They had an agreement with the city. We've heard it from the chief of staff. We've now heard it from Emergencies, Mr. Ayat. And it was very clear that they were executing it. Brendan Miller made excellent cross to get them to admit that there was no breach by the convoy organizers. The closest they came to defining a breach was when they were claiming that once a truck would move, someone else not associated with the core group, but associated with protesting the government would move in. And they were trying to highlight that as some sort of justification to call off possibly the agreement, that other people who weren't unified with the core group who has the agreement in place were not honoring agreement. Now, I want you guys to kind of understand what the government's position on that is. It's not good because it's not even legal. They're trying to make these other people who are not party to an agreement a party to the agreement against their consent. They're not even wanting to be a party to the agreement, but yet the government is trying to inject them as a party who has the ability to void the agreement. That's silly. I don't even know why they're even making that argument, because it's not legal. You can't make somebody else party to your agreement and then change your agreement or do something to it, like breach it based on their actions. For example, if you had a cell phone agreement with your cell phone company and your neighbor, not even using your plan, just happened to maybe have the same company and they decided to put the bill on yours, why not? Right? Why do they need your agreement? They can just do what they want. No, that's not how contracts work. The ABCs of contracts is an offer, an acceptance, and consideration. If the what they called the extreme convoy protesters, if they weren't party to the agreement, they weren't party to an offer, an acceptance, and they're not even getting consideration. So they can't be party of the agreement. And that was a silly argument by the government to make. I also want to talk a little bit about, because we have some time, at the end of the day yesterday, the commissioner was asking some questions of Mr. Ayat around Hotel Chateau Laurier and that incident. You know, we keep hearing about that fire truck blocked. The testimony from Mr. Ayat during his testimony before the commissioner intervened or had some questions was that, like with all situations, with all calls, they have different levels of it, and a general call would cause certain vehicles to be dispatched. Nothing special, nothing different. One thing that I did like that Mr. Ayat did mention was, even though the protest was going on, they didn't change and put in place anything different. So, for example, if a general call was 4 trucks, they didn't change it to 6 trucks during the protest or anything like that because of routing issues. And that's likely because they didn't have routing issues. It was relatively good. So at the end, when the commissioner was pulling that question back to the table about that situation, and as we learned, it was a broken sprinkler or something related to a sprinkler, so non-life threatening. The commissioner was, in my mind, he was directing the questioning to fulfill his thought that the blocking of the roads in some way could have been life-threatening. So it felt like the commissioner was trying to get to the point where he was getting Mr. Ayat to agree that because of the protest or congestion in the streets, there definitely could have been life-threatening. That made me uncomfortable because I don't know why the commissioner is trying to get to a place in his mind. He should be following the journey wherever the evidence and the law takes him. So he shouldn't be trying to fill in the gaps, especially in the face of Mr. Ayat, who was pretty adamant that Hotel Laurier, the Chateau Laurier, was embellishing the situation, and he's the one. Mr. Ayat was saying they were making it a lot worse than it really was. 4 trucks were dispatched, 3 got there. If any information came up, whether it was before the trucks got there or even through dispatch, that it was more serious, like a fire, they're very prepared and ready to do it. So there was no concern even from Mr. Ayat around that incident, and they were unable to bring up any other incidents that would have at least generated the concern that the city couldn't handle it. What I got out of Mr. Ayet's testimony was he was being asked to admit that he didn't do a good job. And I don't think he actually believes he did a bad job. And I don't think the evidence shows that he did a bad job. So when he's giving testimony about how the emergency services were functioning in the city, it is his job to make sure they function well. And that was his testimony, that they were functioning well. So take that for what you want, but I do believe him. I was listening to him. I didn't hear any contradictions. I heard him being very adamant, or not adamant. He was being very careful and making sure that nothing was embellished or not straight. And when someone talks like that, I give them a lot of trust, because they're trying really hard to make sure that the truth is out there and the good information's there. I apologize. It's pretty cold in here, so I got a bit of a runny nose. So at the end there, the commissioner did. So we had a weird day. So the first witness, the commissioner did a great question, and then the second witness, the commissioner didn't do such a good question. But maybe that's part of his being impartial and unbiased, is to talk about even what the other side said could have happened, maybe the extreme end. So maybe he was probing for that, which could help at all, or help as well. Sorry, I'm just trying to get the stream back up. I see it's back. So maybe he was doing that. So maybe he was just exploring the extreme end as well, so that in his mind, he at least had that answer that, yeah, if it was a fire, it could have been more serious. But at the same time, the emergency services of Ottawa were prepared to handle any situation that came up. And as we keep hearing, nobody got hurt. I also kind of want to say to Mayor Jim, if you ever hear this, look, dude, the fact that nobody was hurt, there was no fighting, there was no resistance from the protesters, is the reason why it went nonviolent. The truth is, there's lots of violent video of the police on protesters. So for Jim to say he was very pleased at the work of the OPS, so that nobody was injured and there was no violence, he is excluding certain victims from the protester side, and he's certainly not commending the true heroes of this, and that would have been the protesters who were provoked, pushed, corralled, threatened, name called, and they still didn't do violence. So those are the real people who should be receiving the kudos for keeping it peaceful. It certainly wasn't the police, as Jim Watson wanted to let the world know. Now, I do say to the police, good job, because you do also have to keep your peace. For the most part, we saw a lot of police officers who were observing, but not being aggressive. We saw a lot of officers who were talking to the public. We also saw a lot of officers who blatantly made it known that they couldn't be on video. So we had a lot of streamers walking around who were willing to speak to the police officers, but they couldn't, whether it was they were told not to, which is most likely, or they weren't comfortable with it. In either case, we didn't get to have a lot of video of police officers talking peacefully with the protesters. However, it happened all the time. Lots of testimony and lots of witness statements where they would go up and talk to a police officer and ask him, why you're here, why are you doing this? And really what it comes down to is that's their job. The job is to be there in case it's needed. It is a large crowd, whether you're peaceful or not. And there's always going to be people within any group and any crowd who are not there for the same reason as the majority. Now, lucky for everybody, because I think if this situation did get violent, we would have a much different inquiry. Mr. Watson said that as well. He said if there was violence or a death, it'd be a much different inquiry, and he'd be right. Because if that actually happened, it would be a lot tougher for us to push back on the government. Oh, here we go. Thank you. Well, just waiting for the audio to quit on the stream because it gets distracting in the ear. Well, there you go. There's the first half of the morning. No major surprises at all here. She's really just talking about the formalities of the committee, what they were working on, trying to get resources. We heard that 1,800 officers come up again. We heard her complain that the province committed some resources, but then didn't deliver them. And I didn't hear a single peep about opening negotiations, mediation, de-escalation, communication. These were words I didn't hear her use at all when describing what could have been done in order to alleviate the situation. And all of those things I just mentioned there would have been open channels. There was nobody denying that. She also did mention that the convoy organizers only had a buy-in about 70% of all the protesters there. So what that establishes is, and it's, logic will tell you, nobody had full control of everybody. And quite frankly, in a democratic society, that's exactly what's going to happen. So representing 70% is a large portion, but they'll never get 100%. And to not have negotiations, mediation, de-escalation, communication, to not have any of those is, I think, really where the major problem is on this particular issue. Not the resources, not the training, not the swearing in of police officers, not the logistics for that, not the costs for that. And she also mentioned a threat to her, and the threat wasn't really serious enough for police services. She was offered it, she turned it down, and she also talked about a young female staff. I'm not sure why we keep getting the gender and the age of people as if that really matters. You're working with a counselor. Your office is going to have phone calls like this all the time. They're not going to come just during a protest. They come all the time. And any staff who is unqualified and untrained to be taking phone calls for counselors where they may get hostile shouldn't be there if triggering is a problem for them to the point where they need time off. Sad to hear that would happen to somebody. I don't want anybody to be suffering in any way, shape, or form. However, you shouldn't have somebody who can't take a phone call that can get aggressive, because without the protest or not, these are counselors' offices and they're going to hear mostly grievances. Very rarely do phone calls come in just to tell them how great they're doing. Most of the time, the phone calls coming in from the public are going to be a grievance and some request of some sort. So the people answering those phone calls should be trained and capable of handling annoyed, upset, frustrated, and even angry phone calls. Of course, threats coming from anybody is something we shouldn't be doing. And they keep talking about the threats coming from outside of Canada. So even if that's the case, I'm not sure how that's a responsibility or it can be used against Canadians or the protesters in any way. Maybe that's because they don't have jurisdiction over finding out who those people are. I'm not sure why that matters, but threats of any kind shouldn't be happening. So I'm glad to see that nobody actually followed through on those, and there doesn't seem to be too many that were actually serious or had much material or substance to them. We got a question here from Kelly. Was there any discussion about meeting with the... No consultation, no nothing. But we do know that they were happy to talk, they were willing to talk, and they were demanding to talk. So there's no question that the channel would have been open had the committee even had one person come in. That would have been a good start. Maybe its media didn't lie and downplay how many trucks are coming. We keep hearing contradictory information about how prepared and how much information they had. But we all know, we saw the convoy go through Manitoba. We knew how long it was. We knew how many people were coming. She was talking about how the funds were coming in. Yeah, at the time, they were in the millions, and there's a lot of support all over the place for the Freedom Convoy because of their message and that they were trying to deliver to Ottawa. So I'm kind of finding it perplexing that we still hear from people that they were surprised that there was a convoy coming, that they were going to be there for a while. I think when they were told that mediation and conversations wasn't going to happen, they should have understood that, yeah, they're going to be there for a while. And then it sounded like they were preparing for that. So they were digging in their boots and they were getting resources and supplies to assist them. It's sounding more like a war zone than it is a protest. From one side, though. From one side, they were treating it like an enemy, and they had to treat it like generals, and they had to have strategies, and surge and contain was a term she used. And by the way, we had that term used at the G7 in Toronto, surge and contain, and that ended up becoming, after a court case about it, illegal. You can't do that. There was a human rights violations. People were were compensated later because of a surge in contain that happened at the G7 in Toronto, downtown Toronto, one year. So that's something that no city should be doing, no police force should be doing. It's something that we've adjudicated and we should not be doing in Canada. So for her to use that term, that rung a bell, surge and contain, that's something we don't do. And she freely was mentioning it there. If they're getting their info from media. Yeah, no, even Mayor Jim mentioned that quite a few times. I would watch the TV and see the pictures. Mainstream media was not showing everything, and mainstream media would recycle old news, and they would have conversations and project issues that didn't actually exist there. So if you watched only mainstream media, you had a very negative, fear-based perspective of it and no other perspective. However, if you watch streamers like Ottawa Walks and Viva Fry and Travel 69, I think was one of them, all of those people provided a much better perspective, and they were showing a lot happier group of people. They were getting on and they were having a good time, but they were also getting frustrated that they weren't being listened to. They were willing to dig in and have their message heard. They really deserve to have their message heard. So I can understand how they were digging in and willing to stay for the long term, or if that meant staying in their trucks or in a motel or a hotel or whatnot, they were planning to stay there for the long term. Positive dancing and music and stuff was excellent relief for the tension. That wasn't the primary purpose. The purpose was to have their message heard. So I'm glad they kind of stuck there and did that. And then Barbara says both. Yeah. So we had a good interview with, we're going to call it a whistleblower because they wanted to be anonymous and they wanted to tell us like the true information. She did it on fear that she could, if she was caught, there would be repercussions. So this is a true whistleblower. What she ended up telling us about what the government was mandating the staff to do was basically she let us know that exemptions were not being honored. Religious exemptions were not being honored. Anybody that wanted to claim an exemption, especially religious, they were challenged. They were pressured. They had to sit through a meeting that included things like your spiritual leader has said the vaccine is fine, even though we have case law in Canada that says your spiritual beliefs are your own. They're private. And even if a spiritual leader says something, you don't have to follow your spiritual leader. They're private. So that came up, and it looks like the government was violating at least that one past precedents where you can't require somebody to follow a faith leader. They are allowed to have their own personal beliefs. And she also mentioned how there was really no appeal process and there was no a way to kind of fight any decision that was made. It was simply put that if you tell the truth and you didn't do the vax and you weren't going to do the vax, you'd be losing your job October 15th without pay. You'd be on leave. And there's no EI. I think that's horrible. I think there's going to be a judgment in the future, a decision on that in the future that will indicate that should not have happened. EI should have applied because making a personal medical decision is not ground. Oh, I'm back, and there's the hearing. So if you can, let me go check and make sure I'm still live, because we had some hiccups yesterday. That was my fault, but I haven't done anything today. Being a good, nope, we're good. Great. So sorry you lost my mug for a second there. It was probably for the best, but here I am. I'm back. Barbara, you seemed quite happy when Fox News showed up. For sure. Look, if CBC went in too and they were being honest, like if the coverage was being honest, they would have been welcomed just as much as Fox or anybody else. Fox wasn't being welcomed because it was an American media station or anything like that. Fox was being welcomed because they were being honest. They were telling the truth to protesters. They were going around speaking to people. They were showing the diverse crowd. There was people of all types there. There were all types of flags, rainbow flags, all types of flags. So there was a good support from the community, the real community of Canada. And when Fox showed up to show it, of course, they're going to have no problems. Global, CBC, CTV, some of the other ones that take a lot of money from the federal government in order to sustain their reporting, those ones got a lot of booing because people would listen to what they were saying, and they would strategically move the camera into positions to try and capture the narrative and not the reality. Had CBC and anybody else decided to, do journalism, true journalism, they would have been welcomed, because that's exactly what everybody was looking for. They were looking for the truth to get out, as many Canadians can see it as possible. So there's no question in my mind that they would have been welcomed. And the proof is the streamers. So the streamer journalists, the independent journalists that were walking around showing it like it was, none of them were harassed. None of them had problems. They were welcomed everywhere. And many stories were told and many stories were recorded. Hopefully one day we'll see a collection of those from some of these streams, but there's a lot of information there for Canada if they ever want to find it and see it. And it's something to be proud of, what the protesters were able to do up until the violent push from the government was something to be proud of if you actually understood what they were there for and how they were trying to accomplish it. If you didn't understand that and you only understood the mainstream media, I can understand why you were concerned about the problems that you were being told about. But hopefully this inquiry will help you understand that there was a lot of projection going on, a lot of what ifs going on, and a lot of overblown paranoia going on. I'm a little disappointed again to hear how unprepared the city was on certain levels, but at the same time, how over-prepared they were trying to be when this was a peaceful protest. There was no indication that it was going to be anything more than that, especially after the first few days as things were established. It should have been pretty clear that, no, this is not a violent group. They're not breaking windows. They're not rioting. And any assumption about a coup was definitely misplaced. So anyways, I think after the first few days, it should have been clear to council that this wasn't going to be violence, but they assumed it. They definitely were trying to be prepared for what could have been maybe what they thought might have been a January 6th type of event. But if you actually spoke to the organizers and even the participants, that's not even close to what was on anybody's radar. You had people like Tom Marazzo, who was making sure the emergency lanes were open all over the place all the time. And that was a complete success. He worked with the city and the emergency department and made sure that that happened. Anybody that came in, there was somebody that would explain that to any new participants that were coming in, and everybody obliged by it, because we all understand and respect the need for safety for residents and cities. So that wasn't violated, and that was kept and maintained. In the U.S., really just because. Yeah, no, there's a bunch of stuff. Jurisdictionally, we got a lot of issues to address all over the place, all over the world. The U.S. is an interesting thing to keep an eye on, because they're kind of the leader when it comes to some of the science and information, when it comes to the medical side of things. Canada piggybacks on a lot of the U.S. regulators. For example, aviation. A lot of our aviation rules come from the FAA. We do have some of our own as well, but we basically piggyback on them. Same thing with CDC. We got a lot of information from CDC making its way through our federal government. So we do rely upon a lot of the American systems and departments. So that's why we should keep an eye on how things are going down there. But I don't spend a lot of time there because we got a lot of things in Canada to also address. Justice for speech to Canadians from the cottage. Yeah. That's Jan 6. So yeah, no, I'm not happy. Like, look, we're all Canadians. We all want to be proud. We don't have to love our leaders. We don't have to love all the decisions they make. In fact, if you prepare yourself to feel that way, you won't be disappointed. You'll just understand a bit better. Leaders are there to do their best, and sometimes they don't. I would say that a lot of the reactions that Justin had when it came to the convoy, the way they were moving across Canada, and then the choice of words he used, they resonated to Canadians in a very negative way, and that was on purpose. When he was making some of his statements en français, calling us racist and all that stuff, that's not how leaders are supposed to act. Even if you truly felt that way, even if you truly had that belief, even if you truly knew that information, you can still talk about a group and work with Canadians and relay information to Canadians without being a name caller and without stooping to that level. It's unnecessary. There I am. Not sure. Maybe I'll get off of JT for a bit and my video will stay longer. Leaders don't divide, they pull people. True leaders, Barbara, true leaders would. Yes, absolutely. But unfortunately, leaders are in the position where they can divide. A slip of a tongue and that will do it. All right, we got audio back. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of this. I'll see you soon.
Short a witness.
Okay, just give me a moment as this audio goes away. There it is. I don't want to take the chance of muting it because last time I did that, I lost the stream, so I'll have to just live with that. Okay, there we go. Audio's off. Well, lunchtime. That was another good one. We are hearing, we had a good conversation here, but we are hearing a lot of finger pointing. We're hearing phone calls or the phone being used to make recordings. We're hearing about last minute evidence or late evidence, disclosure. To those who don't know what disclosure is, it's basically giving up all the information you intend to use during the hearing or committee or trial or court or whatever it is you're headed to. And typically it's 30 days in advance of the date of the trial. There's some exceptions, there's some other rules, but typically it's well before 10 minutes before the witness is even called. Call that a game, call that a tactic, call it a whatever. But the fact that this recording existed and then magically right before the witness shows up today, it's been produced. The court or the commission will actually frown on that. That is blatant disregard for the spirit of the hearing or court, which is fairness. That's why we do disclosure and all the documents are shared so that everybody has a chance to kind of understand everybody's position and your perspective and what you're going to rely upon. Dropping it onto counsel, co-counsel, or even opposition counsel right at the last minute is also very unprofessional. It's not something we want to be doing to anybody unless you're trying to ruffle feathers or trying to throw someone off their game. That could potentially be used as a strategy. There's a lot of chess and games played in all parts of your life. The law is the same as anywhere else. So I can't say what it was meant to be or meant, but there we go. We had some late evidence come in. They're going to debate it over the lunch on whether or not it's admissible. They tried to assign it a number into the database. I believe the commissioner stopped, or there was an objection at that point to stop that until they actually sit down and have a discussion about that. So I guess we'll find out if it's relevant, if it makes it in, and if we'll see more of that. I don't like seeing that. It's not a benefit to anybody. And when the process itself is played with and there's some shenanigans and some games with it, you're just opening up the door for people to just disregard the entire process and assume it was, shenanigans from the start and we can't have a fair process. So I'd ask everybody to be a little bit patient with that. It happens. It shouldn't happen. But what we're seeing is from a very important witness who was the chair and she is also a counselor with the city of Ottawa. So her position is pretty important. So I don't know why they're doing that. I also found it weird that she recorded it on her phone. I have been in IT and government. There's way different technology used for recording meetings. Everybody has microphones. It goes through a system. So I'm not sure why anybody's personal phone was used at any point to make a recording. And if you heard what she said about her assistant, she said, no, it was on my phone, not her phone, or something along those lines, which made it seem like this is a common practice for them. So they're going to be recording on personal phones, meetings that should be recorded through official means. And it seems to be commonplace. So when she said she didn't know how to, use files on her phone and using the common, I don't know how to use technology excuse to explain why she didn't do something, I don't buy that for a second, because right after that, she talked about how it was on her phone and not the other phone. So clearly her staff and she would do this probably often. Now, why would people record, and can they record? Well, as you saw in the chat, we have Donald Best here. He is a police officer. He does understand this stuff. And I went through law school. I did practice as a paralegal for a while. Canada is a single notice for recording. So one party on the recording has to be aware of it, and it could be the recording party themselves. So, and a lot of people do that. They do record a lot of meetings around them for various reasons. So for this particular counselor to do it, it's not surprising. But for her to kind of pass it off today as more like an official recording that just kind of slipped out in the cracks, that's not the case at all. Because an official recording would have been through the official systems, the microphones that are set up in the meeting room, not through someone's personal phone. Makes sense. Yep. And I can also tell you it's frowned upon and it's also discouraged to be using your personal devices for work in the government. Security is a big concern, whether or not your device is dropped, lost, stolen, broken into, whatnot. It's really much frowned upon. And in a lot of places, it's restricted. You actually can't do that. So I'm not sure what her policies are for IT at the council, but I've seen council IT policies and I participated in them. And we wanted to make sure that no data was on personal devices, not even an email. So there was a lot of technology and encryption and stuff that happens to try and make sure that everything was safe. And it doesn't make sense to me why she would use her phone in an official capacity. But as Donald pointed out, it's not illegal. You can do it. But what he also pointed out was whether or not it's admissible as evidence is a question for another day. It would be for the judge and the parties and the relevance. And that question is happening right now with all the representatives on this particular piece of evidence that she provided today. That question is being argued right now. Is it relevant? What does it contain? And the fact that it was just sprung like that is just wrong. So we're going to find out some more. Here's something from Donald. Yeah, no kidding, right? How many more are there? But I'm not concerned because, again, I don't see how this is helping the government's position to establish the grounds for the Emergency Act. We are hearing a lot of government finger pointing here, and the convoy doesn't have to be part of this one right now. We heard a lot about conniving against the chief, pressure to have him quit. Implying that he asked for a check. I'm pretty sure he's gonna say something different on that one, because she kind of used her words in a particular way to imply that he said at some other point, and then she just re-asking that question. But she also said that CBC was releasing an article later, and she was calling him before the article, hours before the article, and then she said he spoke to her the next morning at about 8:30 and said he will take a check. So what could have happened based on the timeline that she provided was she knew the story was going to come out, whatever it was. It doesn't even have to be true anymore. Just the story existing is enough to cause trouble. And by the way, we really should stick to due process. So whether or not that story is true should be proven before it's used in any way. However, she let him know that the story was coming out later that night. Implied on the phone call, suggested on the phone call, or confirmed on the phone call that he can take a severance, and left him with it. She did say that he said no, he wanted to stick around till the end, but shortly after that, later that night, you can presume, because it's her timeline that she gave us, that CBC article did come out. He had time to think about it, reflect on it, and then the next morning decided probably best for him, his family, his sanity, and everything else about him to go ahead and take that check. To me, that is constructive dismissal completely. She used a word about it being discussed as a constructive dismissal. And if I have any employment lawyers on this stream, you know that that's one of those words that means something specific. And it's not allowed. Employment laws in Canada don't allow constructive dismissal. You are exposing yourself up to a lot of liabilities. Severance, lawsuits, wrongful dismissal will be the lawsuit that's filed for that one, because constructive dismissal is certainly a type of wrongful dismissal. So there's no doubt that there would be lawsuits from ex-chief Slowly if that if that was the case, and we got to hear about it. So I would not be surprised if there is a lawsuit, at least for wrongful dismissal and possibly defamation coming out of ex-chief Slowly, because that's what I'm hearing here. I'm hearing a lot of defamation, blaming him for things that likely didn't happen. For example, a couple of times we heard where he was considered not cooperative, but he was only one saying that, well, what you're asking for is not legal. So denying somebody an action because it's illegal is not what I would consider uncooperative. That would be the definition of cooperative, because you're actually making sure that you're doing the right thing, not just what the person wants. And if that's what they're building their basis on for Slowly is that he wouldn't give half the counselors what they wanted, which was boots on the ground and a stronger resistance and a stronger push, because it was illegal. Well, yeah, I don't like the idea that there was even conversation about get rid of him. That's exactly what you want from your police chief. That's exactly what you want from your government. People who will stand up and say, no, that's illegal. We can't do that unless you're able to get me an opinion or find a way to go about things legally. We're unable to assist you there. And then that should not become the basis or the grounds for complaints. And as she said, one of the complaints was anonymous even. So that shouldn't be the grounds for complaints. That would lead to an article about somebody being difficult to work with, and then use that article to entice a resignation or retirement. Yeah, I think she opened up the bag there. I think she said way more than she probably intended to. And I believe her testimony is going to be used a lot in future court cases, especially with Slowly, probably with other divisions as well. So we're going to hear her under some more cross. Okay, Donald. If there was one secret, there are more for sure. And Donald, you know this, because whenever you arrest somebody for stealing, it's always their first time stealing. Criminals or wrongdoers, they're always the most unlucky group in the entire world because they're only caught the first time they do it. No, of course, there's many recordings. This is probably her personal habit, and for good reason. She may have had probably several times in her past where she wished she had a recording, and several times where she was glad she had a recording. I'm not coming down on her for having a recording. Lots of people do that for lots of reasons, and that's why it's been adjudicated in Canada as a single party recording law. So we do accept it and allow it. But however, I don't understand why she's personally recording official meetings and then why that wasn't produced during disclosure properly, because here she is using it right now, or trying to use it right now. All right. Well, I think we're going to do an early lunch. So some of you can, I see you've taken off already, but please come back. I'm going to also do an early lunch, but what I'm going to leave you with is a video. So in our chat, you see Wayne Cunnington come up quite often. He's my friend from the UK. We met through the internet, through my activities, reaching out to people with vaccine injury stories. I want to be careful with YouTube. These are people's stories. I'm not stating any facts here, but his story is quite compelling. He's allowed to tell his story. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the beginning of this video with you. It's a 2.5 hour long video, so we're certainly not going to watch all of it during this break, but I will share it with you so that you can, well, get to meet Wayne, understand where he's coming from, and you'll also learn what I learned about him. And he's one amazing individual. He's so brave, he's so strong. It bothers me a bit, the struggle that he's facing here, but if you have the time and you can go ahead and listen, here's Wayne's story, and I'll be right back after lunch. Okay, recording started. Happy Thanksgiving, Canada, and hello to everybody who's joining us. I would like to introduce you to Wayne Cunnington. He is one of my friends from the UK. I met him on Getter. Apologies for the audio. This is a raw video. I haven't done any editing, so yeah, apologies for that, but here you go. Because he's not allowed on Twitter anymore. He's out there telling the truth, and he's got a story to tell. So I'd like to introduce you to Wayne. Hi, Wayne. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Jason. Thank you for having me on.
Now, I met you on Getter. I couldn't find you on Twitter. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, sadly, I got banned for the second time, and I decided I just had enough of the shadow banning and the abuse and the censorship, and start again somewhere else.
Yeah, and Getter, you're getting quite the traction there. But what was your reach on Twitter at the beginning before you got banned?
From a very short period of time, from the injury back in March 2021, under a year, I seem to gain about 7,000 people, just purely because I've been sharing my story, trying to better inform people about risks from their vaccines, really. And short period of time, I was talking to people, trying to help people, and they were helping me. It was just very good, very social, but also I got a lot out of it. It's quite rewarding.
And what was the tweet or tweets that ended up getting you permanently banned? I guess you're suspended until Elon takes over.
There was something that was said on the news, and it just really, really wound me up. And I'd heard that Elon Musk was mentioning that it was okay to talk about ivermectin now, and up until that point, everybody had to censor your own tweets, or else you'd get suspended. And so I did. I mentioned it in a tweet, and I thought, wow, we can talk about ivermectin now. And that was it.
That was it. So one tweet
That
about
was it.
ivermectin. There
I've
wasn't
had
even.
ivermectin again. I'd had it last August, and it made such a difference to my health. But I tried it again shortly before I got banned, and I just happened to say, "Oh, had some more ivermectin," but actually didn't censor myself, and of course that was it. I got banned, and no way back.
Wow. So
See,
you couldn't even delete it or anything. That was it, suspended for life.
yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's a permanent suspension, so they don't ban you because you still count as a user
Right.
on the platform.
Just
See,
inactive.
inactive.
Yeah.
You can still read tweets and things, but you can't interact. Very clever marketing ploy there.
So you're able to look on Twitter, but you can't do anything. You can't add a
Yeah,
tweet, react,
yeah, that's
add a
right.
link, nothing. Oh,
But they
wow.
also occasionally do like to say, "Oh, would you like to sign in first?" Because it stops you then accessing certain things sometimes.
Hmm.
Of course, it knows you can't sign in because at the top of the screen it puts up, "You are permanently suspended."
Do you
So
think
it just
Elon's going to finally take over?
Well, he says it by the end of the month, doesn't he? 28th of October, when he finally signs and it's all sorted out. All
Right,
anybody
but the
who's
latest news is as of Thursday or late Friday, Twitter is now opposing the purchase and wants to continue with the court case. Interesting. It may be a tactic to just delay it to the end of the midterms, which would be the following week after the 28th.
Mm,
So he might not get it till mid-November, just to
mm,
allow the midterms to finish. But
yeah,
that's speculation. But what I do know is they're now pushing back. He offered to complete the purchase at full price, and now they're saying no. So
mm.
we'll see where that one
It's
goes.
a crazy battle, isn't it? Because when you want the court case, but then you don't want the court case, you want the sale, but then you don't want either. And
Well, it
yeah,
could be just a delay, or it could be they want to kind of prove their point all along and say they were righteous all along in their position, and Elon wasn't. I'm not sure how that matters much, but
mm,
maybe it's just a delay. But that's not why we're here today. Like Elon's
no,
going to do his thing and eventually take over, and hopefully we can see you on Twitter a lot more. But you gained 7,000 followers by sharing your story. Most people who are going to be watching this video may not know your story yet. You shared it with me, and I haven't stopped thinking about it. So I would like you to, take your time and maybe share it the way that Canada needs to hear it, because the truth is coming out. I am going to share this on Twitter. If it gets me suspended for a bit, we'll take it. But we need to tell Canada how people like you are actually really affected by the vaccine and the choice to take it.
yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, it's not a problem. The way I've thought about things all along is if I can then help somebody to make a better decision about their health, they know the full risks going into it. If I'd had just a little bit of this information, there's no way I would have taken up a vaccine that would seriously affect my health as it has. So many people that they still aren't hearing this information because there's the censorship. They refuse to help people make those decisions. They'd rather put them through something that they don't even need. And of course, you end up in positions like myself and many thousands of others. That's if you actually lived. I mean, there's so many people I know who've had the same sort of things as myself and ended up with a brain hemorrhage and sadly died. But so I had my vaccine on the 22nd of February 2021, and in a very short space of time, I ended up with crippling headaches. I mean, anybody that knows what a serious headache is like, it's like a migraine, but it's worse. They describe it as being having your head in like a vice, and that's what it was. It's excruciating, but I couldn't think. I couldn't process thoughts. And this had come on within hours. So I spent the next few days in bed, pain relief. Didn't seem to hit it. And then I seemed to be dizzy, confused. So trying to deal with all that, and then ring the doctors, because by this stage, they're not interested. They've given you this vaccine, and that's all that they wanted because they're getting paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
So then you're battling with them to be seen because you know that there's something wrong with you. And the days go by. Again, you're ringing frequently. And then into the second week, and you're still battling to see somebody because they won't listen to you. Don't worry, it's just normal side effects. Well, it's not normal side effects. If it's crippling you and it's stopping you from functioning and working, being active. So they decided that they would, this is what they said to me, they said they would see me, they would get me in to check me over because it didn't sound like I was particularly well. And then the next day when they were meant to ring me, they didn't, and I rang them back and they said, well, we don't need to see you, it's just normal side effects. So it's frustrating. And they said, well, look, if you're still ill over the weekend, because this is the end of the second week of me ringing constantly. Now, I'd lost awareness of how ill I was and how serious things were, or else I would have just gone to the emergency room myself. But you lose full awareness of how things are, and so you just kind of sit there in front of the television and not do a lot and just thinking that hopefully the next day will be better and the next day will be better. So by the time the Monday morning came round, I rang the doctors saying again, I'm still not well. I've been trying to get hold of somebody for 2 weeks. And I wasn't making much sense. I didn't realise how badly it was. And the doctor rang me back and said, well, look, we need you to see you now.
Okay. What prompted that phone call from the doctor?
It's because I'd rang him in the morning, but I wasn't making much sense.
Okay.
Because I was confused. I was very disturbed. I was struggling to walk. I mean, I've been getting progressively worse as the days go by. But the pressure that was building in my brain, which I didn't realise at the time, it was making the inflammation worse. My confusion was getting worse. And I had stopped driving because I didn't feel safe. But crazily, I jumped into my car because they needed to see me, and I drove down there. It's only a short distance away, but how I got there, I don't know.
Wow. Okay.
Within moments of seeing me trying to stagger down the corridor because I couldn't hardly walk. This is, we'll get you an ambulance, just like that. Took my blood pressure, and it was 202 over 120. He said, well, we were going to tell you to pretend that your condition was worse than it is, but because your blood pressure is so high, we don't need to.
Sorry, the doctors were going to get you to fabricate your symptoms for the purpose of being looked at?
Yeah, that's right.
So the symptoms were so common for a lot of people that you needed to be really exaggerated to get attention for it?
My symptoms were so bizarre And you have to remember that the number of people that have been injured by the vaccines and that I've spoken to as well, we all seem to have the same sort of symptoms. Yeah.
Okay.
It's
Please
the
explain
crushing
in detail.
headaches, it's the dizziness, you have a problem with your gait, your walking, so many neurological issues. And it seems to be quite common, but they don't want to acknowledge that. So, but yeah, to be taken seriously, make it seem like you're worse than you are.
But you didn't need to.
But he said, well, we don't need to now because your blood pressure's so high. So that started off 11 days in hospital when I had a CAT scan, MRI, I had an ophthalmic scan, and that's quite a deep one, and lumbar puncture, which is quite invasive. And it's the most painful thing I've actually undergone. They dug into my spine with needles, basically trying to remove the fluid to actually test for infections.
Okay.
Now, they already had the results of my MRI, which told them that I had brain tissue damage from my vaccine. And they linked it, and they said, we're going to report it to the yellow card system, which is the same, or the equivalent as the American VAERS system, or Canada has
The injury program in Canada.
Yeah, so it's all the same principle.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't need to do a lumbar puncture, but they did. I didn't know full well as to what it entailed, and I was dosed up on morphine, and they said, well, look, we can do this procedure, but they didn't explain the risks. So since that day, I've struggled with my neck, and it's just compounds everything else that you're trying to deal with. I've known people that have suffered from those. People have been paralyzed or stuck to their beds for 6 months or more because there's been complications from it.
And those are the physical ones. There will be some mental as well.
Well, if you spend 6 months confined to your bed because of your lumbar puncture that was there purely as an investigatory method, then you think, okay, fine, but you're not told about the risks. Like the vaccines, you're not told about the risks. So you get them and you have them. So yeah, after 11 days, there were no really nearer as to what was going on, although they knew that there was been a major side effect. The vaccines cause a high blood pressure, which is a condition called hypertension. And because of that, it caused the inflammation and the swelling in my brain, which then caused the brain tissue damage. So my brain has a lining called the myelin sheath. When that gets damaged, it's called demyelination.
Right.
That then lets in things like autoimmune disease. So on the ward, I had 2 separate consultants say to me that they see as likely, because the pattern of damage, as me seeing MS in my not too distant future. Wow. The other one did discuss a possibility of having dementia, but I suppose it's hard to cross out everything. You have to just kind of say, well, worst case scenario, maybe, but if I only suffer from MS in the future, then I think that's bad enough. So you have to kind of just keep pushing onwards and hope for the best.
So just to interrupt quickly, to help some of the people who may not understand about this membrane or the barrier, which helps protect the brain from autoimmune and other parts of the body, toxins in the blood or whatever else is being passed around. Would it be fair to imagine it like a protective layer around the brain, and now because of what you're going through, you got a bunch of little holes in it and it's allowing things to come in?
That's right.
Kind of like a sieve almost now.
It is.
Okay.
I
was trying to
picture there. Yeah, there's so many different autoimmune diseases. I didn't realize until I read up about it shortly after. Well, when I was in hospital, I actually looked it up on my phone because that was a good thing. That was the only thing positive, was having a very good Wi-Fi. So I was lying there, dosed up on morphine, trying to look into what was happening. That's when I kind of realized my government wasn't telling me the full picture about the vaccines. There were injuries and all sorts of things happening. And there's dozens of autoimmune diseases, right from arthritis to other more serious neurological issues. So depending on the pattern that they see, they can then make a prognosis on your future. But when you're lying there in your bed and your consultant says to you, you know what this is, MS, yeah, and that's it. They just basically walk away. There's no care, there's no empathy, there's no thought. It's like, well, no, I've done my bit and I'm walking away now. Very cold, very...
Yeah. Do you think the system got that way because of how many people they're dealing with? Or do you think that they search for people who have a ability to detach themselves for a whole bunch of reasons, maybe to self-protect themselves from the profession they're in, or to maybe not necessarily give people different types of hope or care? Because everybody will take empathy their own way. Some might take empathy as encouragement when it's not really the message. What do you think would cause a lack of a bedside manner during this stage? Quantity, or do you think it might be quality?
I know over time, a lot of surgeons, consultants, they seem to have a complex because they've been built up and put on a stand. Everybody's got to praise them, and so they really don't think they need to. They've been put in such a high, exalted position. It's kind of beyond them to spend too long with the normal people. I do know that even when I was in there, there'd been loads of other people. There'd been a guy in there the previous week to me who'd been paralysed by his vaccine. Fortunately, by the time he was discharged, I didn't say how long he'd been in there, he'd kind of got feeling back. It's the buildup of inflammation in the brain that then causes those numbing effects on the rest of the body.
Right.
Which I had at the end of last year, August time. I was making a fairly good recovery, in a sense, from my initial brain fog and other neurological issues. But then I started getting brain inflammation from my injury, and it was causing full body numbness. So, and you could feel it coming on. There's nothing you could do, and you could just throw so much pain relief at it, try and hope to bring the inflammation down. But it was having very little effect, and so I'd be rushed back to hospital again, treated with steroids and various other anti-inflammatory products just to help. And then I'll be discharged the next day because my body was starting to return to normal again. So, yeah.
And to be clear to anybody who's listening, there's a scheme or a program in the UK that will provide £120,000 for a vaccine injury. This act or statute is 40 years old or so. It's a very old piece of legislation which provides compensation in the event of a vaccine injury. You've received this compensation, or you're at least in the program receiving the compensation?
No. So vaccine damage payment system or scheme, you have to apply for it, which I did in March when I was released from hospital. They give you the impression that it will be processed in a very short period of time. I chased it up numerous times during the year. They contacted me in February time, say, we haven't had your medical records yet. We've applied for them, and they hadn't applied. Basically, they lied to people repeatedly. So they finally got my records March time, and they said it should take about 8 weeks to process it all. I've sent them 3 different reminders over the last few months, and I got a reply last week actually.
Okay.
And they said, due to a delay, we haven't transcribed all of your documents from disk, because the doctor's surgery that I belong to provided it by disk. We haven't taken all that evidence off yet. We need to take that. We need to then put it in order, and then do something else with it. But they then say, well, it could take a little while, and I've now found out it could take up to 6 months, which then takes you into 2023.
Yeah.
It's some people, they lost loved ones, and I know the very first person who got her payout because she lost her husband.
But he wasn't a doctor, was he? I think
No,
I read
no,
that
that was no. He got it quite late, actually. No, Vicky Spitz, she lost her husband, who was a musician,
right.
but in his 40s, but late 30s, 40s. But she was the very first to receive it. But like you were saying, what they did, they haven't looked at the sum of money in 40 odd years. And Christopher Chope has actually been campaigning for this to be changed, improved, better in some way, because it's just quite an insult when you've lost a loved one. They would have been your partner providing for your future.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, your £120,000 actually gets used up very quickly, because the benefits or anything, say like you're a single mother or you get some sort of a scheme, a payment from the government, all that gets stopped. This £120,000 compensation scheme overrides everything else.
Right. So it supersedes everything else you're taking.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you've lost
Not in
everything
addition
now.
to.
No. There is a method, a scheme that you can actually put the money into, like a trust. So you would then not affect those other things like a benefit.
Well, you're not receiving it yet, I guess, when it's put in a trust. I guess in the future, when you take it out, that would be considered income then.
I don't know, but she did provide me some details just in case I did actually end up getting one, because the problem is it's causing it's actually proving that cause, because although doctors have said your vaccine has caused the injury, it's all on black and white. I've got the documents from my discharge notes, so it's all there. But you have to actually prove that you've got 60% injury disability.
So a loss of up to or minimum 60%?
Minimum 60%.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Potentially, you could even have lost your leg, like one of my friends, Alex. He lost his leg. He got his payout a few months ago, but potentially, because with the therapeutics that they give you these days, the for better of a word,
Prosthetics and stuff.
Prosthetics, yeah.
Right.
You are now able-bodied in some people's eyes. So
yeah, you'll be regaining function as far as they're concerned.
Well, that's right. So potentially he could have not got anything, because it's not 60% disability, because we've now given you a replacement leg.
Yeah, well, I would argue that that's a temporary improvement. It's not a permanent improvement. So if it's temporary, it can be taken off. It's not a full improvement, I would argue. But that would be for a barrister or someone else to argue.
It's because he had, see, one of the main problems with AstraZeneca when they released their vaccine, the numbers of people were getting blood clots. And because he was the very first person to have got confirmed VIT, vaccine-induced thrombocytic thrombocythemia, that's a direct proven link to the vaccines. And because he had that as well as proof, that then went in his favour, because it's a blood clot condition that you are kind of left with. You can treat it and you can keep an eye on it over the years, but it could come back. And because that's now damaged your body, your system, you've got more weight to a compensation payout. So.
Right. Now, this scheme 40 years ago, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I generalized and looked over it, but it was to tackle vaccine hesitancy back then for legitimate vaccines, when people were a little bit concerned about whether or not they would be injured by it. So they created this scheme to kind of give a safety blanket to society that says, hey, if you take smallpox or one of the other vaccines and something happens, there's a scheme in place to take care of you, which kind of explains why it was capped at maybe 120,000, because they never possibly expected to really have injuries from vaccines, because these were tested and well understood vaccines back in the 70s when they were putting a scheme together.
Mm.
Do you think it's possible that because this is such a different type of vaccine and it doesn't really follow what was a traditional definition of vaccine, this is why your government is kind of taken aback at the number of people who now qualify under vaccine injury because of this statute? And maybe it's taken a long time because of the cost and just the sheer number of people that have entered a program where it really was more of a reassurance than it was as a need. Like you didn't really have a need to have a vaccine injury program until a whole lot of people had vaccine injury. Um, so there's a couple MPs, or you mentioned one, who's pushing this forward. What is the current push in the UK? Is it to replace this scheme with another one? Is it to remove the cap altogether but keep the scheme going? Do you know what it is, what the plans are for this?
There's no major changes planned. All that he's actually trying to put in place is actually having a better, fairer system so that anyone who's been injured, whether it be a very minor disability, would still be looked at as equally as somebody who's been seriously. Obviously, your injury would then reflect the sum of money that you'd be paid, but at least
Right.
you'd still be entitled to something.
Right, it's
'Cause
up
it's-
to £120,000, not a lump sum of.
Well, no, you would get a lump sum of £120,000 if you obviously break the 60% threshold at the moment. But
Yeah.
what he's trying to do is actually trying to improve it. So he wants those 40 years that it's never changed in sum actually brought up to date. So the current, exchanges, I mean, it'd be a phenomenal sum of money. And it would actually be better for those families who have lost loved ones because they now don't need to worry about the future.
Hmm.
And myself included. I mean, I was a fit, healthy guy. I mean, I was 50-year-old. I had no reason to take a vaccine, but my family story kind of changed my mind on things because my mother had died after a long battle in hospital involving quite lethal protocols of remdesivir, midazolam, and morphine-based products. Because she died, and it then put a lot of pressure on the family. My father was ill as well, and all you could hear on the media was all about the fear campaign. You need to save your friends, your family. You need to do the right thing, and you don't think your government doesn't have your best interests at heart. You believe them. If everybody's saying the same thing, even the newspapers, if you don't hear anything different, what do? Unless you're aware that there is a other narrative, you kind of just believe them.
So
It's certainly opened
before,
my eyes.
so before your injury, you were not very skeptical of the media and your government. You followed along and you kind of had some faith in them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd like to think myself very sensible. I'm not gullible at all. The media always seem to have the public's back because it always likes to investigate scandals, stories, and corruption. If they all of a sudden stop doing that, it's quite obvious.
Hmm.
But doing that amidst a pandemic, shall we say, that we now find out that the governments have been funding these media campaigns with hundreds of millions of pounds backed by Bill Gates as well as various others, you then start to see, well, wow, my government lied to me.
Right.
But your media lied to you as well. And who sees that coming?
I believe you're referring to the coalition of media that got the story straight early. It's out of the UK. BBC's part of it, and Bill Gates is part of it. Do you remember the name of it?
What's that? The media campaign?
Yeah, that campaign that came out of the UK with Bill Gates support.
Well, there's actually media campaign services on the gov.uk, and that's quite open. It's all there about that.
Yeah, I've come across it before. I was trying to remember the name of it. So Media Campaign Services.
Yeah, Media Campaign Services. So it's on gov.uk, which is the government's actual website. And quite openly, they say media services, there's some of several hundred million. Bill Gates also supported a similar scheme.
Yeah, I see 319 million from Bill Gates to it.
Mm.
30,000 grants he gave away. Yeah, $319 million. And it's for the narrative of COVID, the pandemic, and
That's right.
vaccinations. Yeah.
And it's
So the
still going on.
Guardian, yeah, there's a whole list of organizations that got it. NBC, CNN. Wow.
Mm.
Wow. It goes on for a long time. Actually, let me pull this up. I can share this on the stream. Give me a second. I knew about the program. I didn't know how big it was.
Mm. I
And
say
that's usually the case, right? You just hear about it, but you don't see how big it is.
I knew things very early on. As soon as I was injured, and I was then spending more time investigating, because before then it was ill health, funeral, work, and because the pandemics and the lockdowns, I was working so busy, crazily, because people were panic buying. So we had a lot more hours. And I just didn't have the time to actually stop and think what was happening everywhere else.
It's
It's quite
incredible.
incredible.
Yeah, it's a long list. Al Jazeera,
Mm,
PBS, which is a public broadcasting.
mm.
Oh,
I say all of these are supposedly fighting for justice, freedom. They work for the public, or so you
well, that's the
thought.
inherent assumption on our part, especially growing up with PBS and other types of media.
Mm,
You would assume they're telling you the truth for sure, and at least if they're not sure, they would tell you. Um, we're experimenting, or we think it might help. But they came out so definitive and so confident, so sure that you won't get COVID if you have it. You won't spread COVID. It
that's
won't
right.
affect anybody. Menstruation cycles, nothing will be affected. And then we heard about breakthrough cases,
Mm,
and then breakthrough, and then breakthrough, and then families having multiple breakthrough cases, and then White House having multiple breakthrough cases. It became so common that they stopped calling it breakthrough. Um,
But did you see the White House press conference when Jen Psaki was still there?
Sorry, was that her first time or second time getting it?
Um, well, it was early on last year, and I remember seeing it at the time, because we had a similar one here in the House of Commons.
Hmm.
So basically, one of the press actually asked her quite openly, he said, well, is it true that all the government is exempt from needing a vaccine? And she said, yes, it is. The
Canada
government,
too.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
Canada
various
too.
other
The federal
departments.
government had a recommendation, not a mandate.
Mm,
And I can pull that up. I pulled it up once before. It's still on the Canada.ca website. It's a
mm,
government recommendation for the COVID vaccine. They never had a requirement.
that's right. But also
Yeah.
the pharmaceutical employees as well. So then you start to look at various government types, and you start to think, well, when they say, well, they've got COVID again, like Biden or Kamala Harris or any other Bill Clinton or whoever, oh, I've got COVID again, and they put up these regular messages on social media, and you
Hmm.
start to wonder, well, hang on, if you are exempt, because most of these would be being connected to government or the Pfizer's pharmaceutical companies,
Right.
then is it purely then to drive the narrative that you need to keep getting vaccinated? I wonder.
Well, 100%. Like because they even told, here's their website right here, Canada.ca. Vaccine requirements. They use the word requirements, but you look, it's a recommendation. Vaccination is recommended. And you look a little bit further, they don't have 100%. They have 98.5. So if it's required and mandatory, you have 100%, and you get rid of the ones that didn't. When
Mm,
we had a lot of organizations, our medical, healthcare, they fired people for not taking the vaccine, but the
mm,
federal government didn't, and they didn't even make it a requirement. And as you can see, it's on their website. So
mm. They're
they
all totally
suspended.
open about it,
Yeah,
aren't
and they
they?
use words like suspension. Okay, just like Twitter, you're not banned; it's suspended, and it could come back.
Mm.
And then they use words like requirement, but it's a recommendation. They're playing with words here. And this is the federal government who's made it mandatory on truckers and other parts of our society, but then themselves don't have to. Why not?
That's the sickening part, isn't it? You know,
Yeah, why
you're
not? The
destroying
hypocrisy.
people's livelihoods, families. You're tearing people apart,
Mhm.
but you're not then putting that same pressure on yourselves.
We had, and I want to say it was the national doctor. I can't remember if it was her or not, but it was telling families, do not let unvaccinated come to the party. Do not let them come to Christmas.
Mm.
Save everybody. Make sure they get it. We definitely had a Thanksgiving, a Christmas, at least one of each, where that was heavily pushed in Canada to don't do it. But yet, federal employees could. Uh, and it was also a recommendation. They didn't require, but boy, did they push it. And I know
Mm.
people who didn't go to Christmas or weren't welcome because they didn't do the vax or they wouldn't give up their status. There was a
Mm.
lot of people that said, I'm not giving you the status. And that was enough to not be included. They may
Sort
have
of
taken the
pressure.
vaccine or not, but we no longer had privacy when it came to our healthcare.
Mm.
Um, so how do we move this message forward? It's very muted in Canada, and even talking about it on YouTube gets some negative, or sorry, on Twitter, some negative attention. Um,
Mm.
but it's a very important message. I know several people who has reported vaccine injury and some deaths, and there's a lot more people that I know who are injured from the vaccine than injured or died from COVID. So it turned out to be, at least in my anecdotally around the people that I know, it turned out to be a pandemic of the vaccine. The
Mm.
vaccine is actually what hurt more people than anything else. Um, I have a concern specifically about your condition because you're headed towards potentially MS and dementia. And you mentioned fogginess after taking the vaccine, and you had
Mm.
some issues like it was almost like an intoxication where you were unable to control your facilities the way you normally would. I'm concerned that we're seeing a lot more of that because when I talk to more and more people further on after getting the vaccine and having some issues, fogginess is something that comes up a lot. Inability to think straight. It's coming up a lot. Um, do you think that this is one of those common side effects that they were talking about? Confusion amongst people after they get it? And if so, how does that help us make sure that we're making intelligent choices going forward if people who took the vaccine are now starting to suffer from confusion and brain function?
So the the doctors are basically saying in a lot of cases they'll confuse the issue. You'll be suffering from something, but oh no, it definitely can't be the vaccine. It
Yeah,
must
they're
be
always
something
very
else.
quick to take that off the table like there's a certainty that continue,
It's
please. Sorry.
because they earn too much money from giving you a vaccine. Here it's £15 that goes to the doctor, another £15 goes to the surgery that they work for. If they vaccinate a child, it's £25. If they vaccinate a care home, they get £500
For the whole home or per person?
for the home, for doing the
Okay.
home.
Okay.
It's all about money. There's a local surgery I saw on social media somewhere, and basically it's not about your health. It's quite openly only to do with money because they say that we're purely funded by ourselves. We'd appreciate it if you got vaccinated because they
Wow.
get paid for it.
Well, that could be the frontline push motivation. So the people that are putting the jabs into the arm, that would be their motivation. But what do you think the motivation is behind that? Pushing a, and we keep using the term vaccine because that's what they labeled it.
Mm.
But I should preface that with saying we're using the post-COVID definition of vaccine here. There's
Mm.
another definition of vaccine pre-COVID, which wouldn't apply here. So just to be clear to anybody watching this now, we're using the post-COVID definition of vaccine, which means it doesn't necessarily trigger an autoimmune response, and it doesn't necessarily give you immunity to whatever it is it's meant to.
Mm.
Pre-COVID, the definition meant immunity. You wouldn't get it, one shot, you were done. Post-COVID, vaccine's been redefined to mean basically anything that they think, or at least will tell you, is going to assist you in fighting off something from the future.
Mm.
So I just want to be clear that we're not using the traditional term of vaccine. We're using the modern term of vaccine, which is
Mm.
very different. And I think that that could be part of the confusion, because a lot of people still are thinking in their minds the traditional definition of vaccine, but applying it to the modern version of a vaccine, and they're
Mm.
not one and the same. So when people are thinking I was going to be immune, I was going to have protection because I'm getting a vaccine, and they use that term, um, I think that's why a lot of people blindly followed it. And they're also today struggling with the realization that maybe this wasn't quite what you thought it was.
Mm.
So, do you think trying to help people understand the difference between the terminology and how the definitions of that changed may assist? For example, when we're talking to people about vaccine injury, is it fair to call it a vaccine injury because it's not a vaccine? Um, I'm
It's
trying to
fairly, yeah.
demystify and deconfuse the situation because the terms have been tweaked and jigged in such a way that we now think that this was a vaccine, like a traditional vaccine.
It's more of a gene therapy. It's the vaccine. It's definitely a vaccine injury, but it's not actually a vaccine that would treat anything because there's so much proof that it's never done anything that it's been promised to do. It won't stop you spreading the virus. It doesn't stop
Correct.
you catching the virus. And the more vaccines you have, you've actually got a higher chance. The same with this ONS data that's coming
Right.
from the
Of
government.
dying.
You've got more chance of being injured because your immune system is being beaten down with every dose. So you've got less chance of fighting off a virus naturally. So you then become vaccine dependent, which
That's right.
plays right into the hands of the pharmaceutical company. Um,
Now we
I
keep going to money, but do you think that really is the motivator, or do you think the money is what's allowing the pharmaceutical companies to just keep doing it? Do you think there's a motivator or an agenda behind even that?
oh yeah,
Like,
I
where did
mean,
this vaccine come from? Where did the COVID come from? Why is this all of a sudden being thrown on us in such a short period of time?
well,
Is there
if
something
you
else other than a bat passing
yeah,
it on to us?
well, if you look at the patents, I mean, they go
Mm.
back several years. Um, so they had the idea for quite a long time. They even had they had the vaccine ready before they had the virus. They're actually still working on it because they're basically trying to make this as lethal as possible
Right,
because they've never isolated it in the laboratory. They took the original coronavirus, which has existed for many, many years, many decades, and then adapted that to make it more dangerous. So people get a virus and you then naturally build up a immune system to it. Because what happens now is that the vaccine under the ages of 50, because you've got a very high, very efficient immune system, and then proves immune response to it. And what's happening is the under 50s, around my age group,
hmm
your body becomes quite violently attacking this virus coming in because the
right.
vaccine is telling it what to look for, which is why so many people are now suffering much more serious neurological issues like myself or dying because your body goes into overload. And the children are suffering the worst because their immune systems are amazing, aren't they? But of course, their hearts can't take it, which is why huge numbers are getting myocarditis.
Right.
Um,
And we'll stop it there. There's, of course, a lot more. We'll have to get to that another time. Just noticed my hair. I've been running around trying to take care of some things. Uh, but we're moments away from getting back online with the stream. So let me get that queued up for us so we don't miss a single moment. There it is. And yeah, that's Wayne. Quite the story. And my goodness, Kelly, Barbara, Light Fire Me, thank you for sharing in the chat your story, how you're being personally affected. That was my concern months ago, that this phase was coming where people were going to start. First, it was going to be, you heard it through the news that somebody was vaccine injured, through local news, so national down to local, down to regional and local, and then you would hear it in friends, family, coworkers, and then it would be closer family, and then eventually it would be immediate family. Like that is happening because a leaky vaccine, as we discovered a bit yesterday with our non who joined us, our non-friend, leaky vaccines can make things a little bit worse. And Wayne's an intelligent man, so this video will be continued. What I think I'll do is, we made it through about a third of it, so Thursday and Friday lunch break, I'll play part 2 and part 3. This video will be released on YouTube in its entirety once I have the time to sit down and edit it, likely this weekend. So you're enjoying the raw version, the version that most likely pretty much the whole thing will exist. I just want to clean it up a bit, especially with audio. And looks like we're about 3 minutes away. So thank you again for joining me on this stream. I really do appreciate it. I take it as a bit of an honor to have the ability to have an audience where I can chat, learn from, join on the show with. I believe we'll have a guest in the next couple of days as well. There's a couple of guests who are getting over colds who do want to be on the show, so we will get them in when we can. And Kelly, this one bothered me, that you lost your contract as a caregiver to adults with disabilities. Of all the people that we definitely need to keep taking care of, this one's very important to me. I'm very passionate about taking care of people. And to hear that even the caregivers are not even being called back at this stage yet, that's tragic. I know that we're talking about in Alberta importing lots of nurses from outside of the country. So it's surprising to me that we still have people who are fully qualified, caring, and obviously very intelligent and very willing to stand up for what's right. And those are the quality people who are currently unemployed and having to fight back to get their employment back and to get back to where they were. So all the best to you, Kelly. If there's anything that we can do to help, of course, let us know. But all the best with that. And Barbara, if you want, we can chat offline, video, no video, share your story. This breaks my heart. I lost a brother young. It's not to this, but yeah, if you ever want to talk, I'll be honored to spend some time with you, Barbara. Hit me up on Twitter, and we can do that. Offline, online, it doesn't matter to me. I would just like to chat with you about that one. And Light Fire Me, yep. They were yeah, we're going to hear more stories like this. I'm sorry. But hopefully, like I said earlier, we don't let this go by without a lesson. We should at least learn a bunch of lessons here. I think how we respond under anxiety, under stress. Our current generation wasn't a generation that had to respond to wars. So we weren't ready for that, I guess. But sorry, the audio just kicked on, so it made me stop talking. It's very distracting. So it looks like we're about to start the commission again. Oh. Okay. Well, Kelly, we can also talk offline too if you like. Reach out to me any way you can, and we can try and chat. I'm so sorry, but thank you to the people in my chat who are sharing their stories. If you're watching this and it's live still, feel free to come and join us as well. You can use whatever name, whatnot. We just want to hear the stories because Canada needs to hear what's really going on. And this is not a topic of conversation with most politicians right now, except for Leslie Lewis, who ran for the Conservative Party leadership. Dr. Leslie, she is talking about this and asking for some answers. But she is one voice in a big sea of crowded voices that are not really helping the situation at all. So the more we talk about vaccine injury, the impact, and the more we are real with it, the higher the likelihood that we're going to learn something from this. move forward with a better understanding on how we can deal with situations like this. And quite frankly, let's put this one behind us as the measuring stick of what not to do and how we don't want to be doing stuff like that again. And we got lots of answers coming to us. I really do believe that. I have a lot of faith in our current processes and due diligence. A lot of people would rather have without due diligence. It takes, or sorry, due process. It takes a lot of time sometimes, but in the end, it's completely worth
Order
it
allowed?
if it's fair. So here we go. Thank you. Well, there we go. She's been crossed. She did her statements, and are you all impressed? Are you all happy? How many of you are from Ottawa? How many of you would feel comfortable with that team taking on a real problem? Let's just say they actually wanted to be violent. Let's say they actually wanted to do something. It sounds like they had no powers in place. They had no plan in place. I'm a little bit surprised. And then we also heard that Bill Blair, we've heard that name from way back when in Toronto. I was in Toronto at the time that the 2011 when we had the G20 riots and overstepping. I mentioned that earlier because they also used the corral method, the surround and corral method, and it turned out to be illegal, and that was the event. So Bill Blair being part of both of them, I'm a little surprised that they were not more prepared. I think that's where they were going with those questions at the end, that Bill Blair should have had, well, you would presume would have had a little bit more experience because he was directly involved with something similar. I don't think there's going to be one finger point here. There's a whole whack of finger pointing. And I think she was correct that there needs to be some sort of review and a real look into exactly what was going on beyond this particular inquiry. And of course, I would expect that to be independent. But yeah, I'm pretty sad, a little disappointed that the city was not able to work much better amongst themselves. One thing we didn't hear a lot about was actions of the protesters. So she spent a lot of time talking about the policies and procedures and how government works and how politicians speak to politicians and police officers speak to police officers, all of that kind of stuff. But I don't recall hearing much from her at all about liaisons with the convoy, with the protesters, trying to make sure the protesters were safe. There's a lot of conversation about threats to officials, but not so much about the convoy. In fact, at the end, we kind of heard a little bit from the government of Canada themselves saying, well, the residents were going to be frustrated and the residents were going to turn on the protesters in a vigilante type way. That's a very interesting position to take for the government, well, for anybody, that vigilantism is a reason to stop a protest now. I don't think there would be any other protest that would be allowed to be stopped because someone didn't like it. That's the purpose of protest. Most of the time, protest is you're not in the majority. Most of the time, you need to get your voice out in different ways because you're not being heard. So by that definition, there's a high likelihood that there's going to be definitely people who disagree with you in a protest. So is the government trying to establish that as soon as a spectator or a resident or someone who is not even associated with the protest disagrees with it, that would be justification to shut it down? I don't think they meant that, but that's where they were going. Because what does it matter that the residents were starting to get angry to the point where they were going to become criminals? If they did that, then they should be addressed and dealt with as criminals. A couple of times that happened. Vigilante with the egg throwing. We did have video of vigilante ripping out signs from young protesters, tearing up signs. We had vigilante in the streets accosting people. All the things that we hear about happening to residents, we actually have video of residents doing to other people. But that's not the reason to go ahead and try and shut down a protest, and it certainly is not a reason to bring the Emergencies Act in place. I still haven't heard a reason. They're really using this resource word a lot, and that was also picked up on by one of the representatives, because what does resource mean? Well, it really does mean your money. So every time they're talking about wanting more resources, needing more resources, asking for more resources, requiring more resources, they're talking about taxpayer money. And we do need to sometimes take a step back and look at what it is we're talking about here still. We're talking about a protest, which historically now, because it has passed and we've had plenty of time to re-examine it, had no assaults, not on the officials. Crime was very low, lower than it normally was for Ottawa for that period of time. We now know it was a peaceful protest. No matter what they say now today, and no matter what emails they pull out from early January or early February, late January, it doesn't change the fact that it was a peaceful protest. They can say that they thought it was going to be something else. It could have turned into something else, but it also can turn into just a street party in a hockey match. You can't do that coulda, woulda, shoulda game because it's unlimited. You can actually do that for anything. But what we did find out was it was a peaceful protest. And then she also did say that Officer Slowly did have a good plan at the beginning, because that ended up being the plan that worked. But she's also the one that fired him and replaced him without even consulting the mayor. And who's cool with that? Anybody all right with a police board having no interaction with the city itself that they serve when it comes to policing, especially during an ongoing event, which is something that everybody would have been addressing? I find that weird. I find that really peculiar. Even if the board itself did make the vote, did have the meeting, and did pass the decision, why was nobody else involved in it, even on an information basis? And then from the very same person, the chair of the police services board, we then hear her complain that she's not receiving information, and she's not getting phone numbers, and she's not communicating with the new team that the mayor's putting together. So it looks like, rules for thee but not for me for her as the chair. So she doesn't have to pass on information, but she requires it. And we also heard testimony, or through questioning, we heard that she was receiving daily briefs, and then she was asking for 2 briefs a day. She was receiving already the standard intelligence. There was nothing being withheld from her. She has just said quite a few times today she wanted more. And then she would refer to that later as not enough intelligence, or no intelligence, or not receiving the information. That's just, you can't have it both ways. It's either you did get the information normally, you did have it daily, and there was nothing withheld, or that wasn't the case, and then you were working with not enough information. But you can't have it both ways. I think what the truth is, she just wasn't pleased with the amount of access to people she had, and the amount of information that was going around. She didn't feel like she was getting enough of it. Whether or not that's the case, that's something for them to decide on a protocol level after the fact. But I get concerned when I hear somebody talk about things like limiting laws, or we had limits on what we can do. What that really means is it was legal. So if there was no law that said it was illegal, that means it's legal. So we heard the government of Canada say and talk to her about whether or not the laws that existed were sufficient for her or for them, and kind of implying that we really wish we could just make laws quickly and have laws quickly. That's not a democracy, people, because if they're making laws within a day, where's the debate? Where's the public input? That's incredible. So they are admitting to being able to, without debate or notice, and there's that term again, on notice, they're just going to go ahead and do it. That's a dictatorship. That's not democracy. So we need somebody to kind of, think about how this should be happening going forward, because are you comfortable with your police service board changing bylaws without debate? That's not democracy. That's a dictatorship. So that's my comment we got here. Okay. So we got a few more minutes here. It sounds like it's going to be a late day, so I'm definitely going to take off and sneak some dinner into me, because I do have a lot of work to do today. So nope, that's good. Any comments from you? How did you feel her testimony went? It sounds like she's about done her career, and it doesn't look like she's expecting to have much of a career after this. I don't think she will. Cops arrest Ottawa cops for Okay, well, we're getting some weird comments out of Facebook. Just give me a second here. There's a button for that. Okay. So what do you think? Do you think she's going to retire? Is she going to get into public or private service? I don't think she has much of a career left, because what she demonstrated to us is somebody who's just someone who appears to be a little difficult to work with, high expectations, high demands, and she doesn't play well with others. That phone call that she provided last minute, I don't think that helped her in any way. I don't think that painted her in a position of someone who was trying to do the best job that the board was looking for. It felt manipulative. It felt like she was trying to get him to freak out on her, yell at her, maybe say something off the cuff out of frustration because he's blindsided. Because she did say she recorded the call because it was possible she might need it in the future for a complaint. Was it a honeypot? Was she trying to get him to do it? I don't know. But what he ended up doing was, I think he addressed it quite well. He was firm. He was upset. And I think it was right for him to feel that way, because he is the mayor and he's going to have to incorporate any other person into the chain of command and work with them during this event. And I think his concerns about being familiar with the locality, being familiar with the city itself, being familiar with the players was a valid concern. It's tough to bring in a completely fresh person who doesn't even know the people and the players and stakeholders or even the geographic region. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just not ideal. And then when he mentioned that maybe Bell would have been a better option, who ended up being chief, that made a little bit more sense, because of course he's deputy chief. He already has all the information and knowledge and experience that you would want in a police chief. But I also got the impression that Diane was using Bell's promotion to chief as a way to get him to be complicit with bringing in another chief in the meantime. She did talk about having a phone call with him where he wasn't comfortable about that conversation and didn't respond to her. So she seems to be a mover and shaker, someone that knows how to make things happen and make things move. She is the chair of the police board, so she got there somehow, likely through years of experience and hard work. But she certainly knows how to play the politics side of things, and she considers herself a politician, being a counselor. And she certainly played that role, and she admitted to it. I was a little bit surprised at how candid she was about her willingness to meddle in the affairs of anything she really could, right down to picking a chief, having no second one looked at. So that was a sole source contract. And anybody listening in government, and maybe even some in large businesses, you don't do that. And I actually believe that's against certain finance rules in government. Every time we had to do a contract, we always had to have 2 or more bids on it. We had to go through a process, and was classified as sole source, and that was not allowed. So what the mayor did there was he kind of dropped the legal term to remind her that you're not really supposed to just pick somebody you like and only have one choice. You should have at least been looking at a few choices. And I'm also curious why it had to happen then. I think the mayor brought that up in that phone call as well. It was bad timing. He thought it was going to hurt the situation. It probably wasn't good for morale and command. There's lots of testimony that at this point in time, the police themselves were tired and they needed breaks, and they were overworked. So yeah, I kind of agree with him. Changing command all of a sudden, it seems to be not necessarily a good way to go about it. And then in the end, Diane had to admit that the person she's replacing had the right plan at the beginning. So slowly did have the right plan in the beginning, and she ended up having to admit that. I'm not saying things would have went differently or whatnot, but those are some weird decisions to be making right in the middle of the thing. And I think the mayor identified that right away as well. Now, how do you feel about all of this talk about BIPOC being consulted? I think it's great that all groups are consulted, but the mayor seemed to only have the interest in one, which is fine. Like, he's interested in a sensitive group, which as mayor he should be, But I am perplexed why that is a factor when it comes to hiring in a merit-based society the best person for the job. But I guess that's a sensitivity that the mayor felt was necessary. And thank you to the keen eyes in the chat. The tax the rich sticker on the back of the laptop of the representative for the residents and the businesses. He hasn't been, I would say, a very helpful representative for his clients in this, because he's really trying to fight against the government narrative and the convoy reality, and paint a third picture, which was the businesses were left out in the dark and they suffered and residents suffered. And that just really wasn't the case. Oh, they're back. Here you go. They came back quickly.
Okay, go ahead.
Commissioner Eric Russo, Commission Counsel, and I'd like to call OPP Superintendent Pat Morris as the Commission's next witness.
All right. Well, that was pretty cool. Actually, we had another good witness, some good straight shooting talking, not trying to sugarcoat anything, not trying to stick to any narrative, just being straight, and we like that. We heard that there was a lot of intelligence gathered, and covert operations means people inside. So whether there were informants or just people providing information or a combination of all of that, they were getting good information. They knew the size of the trucks, each convoy, where they originated, the dates, kind of named them based on locations of where they were meeting to initiate. Yeah, I believe that's true. Yeah, Don. He's an excellent witness. And we may be getting quite a few of these, because the next little batch is going to be police officers, various levels, and we might be getting that. And you're seeing a distinction between city officials, counselors, staff, and police services, and then political appointments on police service boards. There's quite the distinction between how these people operate and work. Not very cooperative sometimes, and you can see on the police side, it appears they just want to be matter of fact, to the point, and call it like it is. But on the political side, optics is a very important thing. So I found that interesting as well. We had some good conversation in the chat about, well, for starters, there's a tunnel between Windsor and Detroit. So Windsor-Detroit tunnel, that was fully operational. That wasn't blocked. There's lots of commercial routes around Detroit. There's another major crossing just around the corner, and that one's used a lot for people who want to kind of skip the Detroit traffic, because it's kind of known for that. So can we talk a little bit about how fragile Canada might be? According to our leaders, we are very fragile. One Alberta crossing and one bridge, when there's multiple crossings, was enough to terrorize the government to the point where they thought that we're going to collapse. Pretty sure Freeland, because she's one of the last witnesses, is going to be talking mainly about that, how close Canada was financially to some sort of collapse. If she does say that, you guys should pay really close attention to that, because we shouldn't be in that position at all. Canada living paycheck to paycheck, day by day. I'll be really surprised to find that we are that fragile for real. I think it's a narrative. I think it was hyperbolic. I think it was meant to rile up support. I'm sure there's no question that some businesses in the Windsor area, automotive, Detroit is big for that. We participate a lot in the automotive industry, especially around Oakville. So I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, there was probably some delays and some logistical problems. But I'll also tell you that these businesses, they're not that fragile either. So snowstorms is a big one that can shut them down for days unexpectedly. No, these businesses are not that fragile either, that they would require drastic measures by the Canadian government on Canadians. I'm also having some trouble with some of the wording that was coming out of some of the witnesses lately, it seems like they were taking the position that this was like a war, that they had to treat it like a war. They had to get counterintelligence. They had to find out what they're doing. They were worried about the equipment on the back of a truck. What did they think they were going to do? Dig a trench around Parliament Hill? What did they think they were going to do with that digger? Okay. I can tell you probably what they were going to do. They were just going to take up space, and they were going to occupy a little bit of area and stay there. But they were protesters, so that's what protesters will do. They will go in there and disrupt a little bit, but to say things like, well, trying to imply that farm equipment being brought has to be brought for a certain reason or purpose, that's just not true. It could just be on the back of the bed, and it could just be to create more weight, not to be used in a nefarious way. We saw some questioning like that yesterday too, when we had a picture of a line of trucks, and the questioner said, do you know what was in the back of those trucks? Come on. Come on. What are you insinuating? Was it full of marshmallows? Are you saying that was full of bread? Are you saying that that was food going spoiled? Or are you trying to imply some sort of paranoid security risk could have potentially been there? I think we all know the answer to that. And I'm not a fan of that kind of insinuation, especially through the question asker, because that is clearly painting narrative. There's no other purpose for that. We did see the commissioner give one question asker a little bit of reminder to keep it professional. Try and keep your narrative and your comments off of it. People get frustrated. You know what happens. It's long days. They're waiting for their time. And I can tell you that no matter how prepared you are, it is stressful up there. Some of them make it look super easy. They've just been doing it for a while, and they're really good at controlling their emotions. No matter who you are, this will be a very stressful day. So I'm not surprised to see a little bit of the emotions getting better of the one or two of the question askers. But so far, so good. I don't think we've had really anything other than maybe Councillor Fleury and the demonstration of fluent bilingualism that one day. But even that was kind of more of a microaggression, if you really want to label it correctly. But so far, I think it's been going so well. So good. I've also noticed in the comments that, let me just scroll to it, see if I can find it here. Sorry, there's a lot of comments here. Thank you very much. Yeah, there were no guns. Okay. They had plenty of heads up. They even made the note about 20 hours from the Manitoba border to the downtown of Ottawa. So, no, I think when we heard earlier that Ottawa seems to be a little bit surprised about the size, it kind of just showed up unannounced. And we know that's not true. OPS had several members on that chain for that intelligence report. So there's no question that information was flowing quite well. It probably was flowing quite well to the Ottawa Police Board as well. So Councillor Diane should have had plenty of information, probably the same information that a lot of the other groups are already also receiving. And let me see what else we got there. But yeah, I thought there was a lot of testimony that was very good for us, because when he was getting into the no guns, no criminal activity, and there was a car accident, and that's all he could really point to on the highways, on Ontario highways. Come on, guys, we've had so many protests, even for small events and small groups, that are far more violent and far more destructive. And we don't make that a national issue. But yet, this one, before it even arrived, it was labeled in a certain way. He used that term fringe. Yeah, that was the term that they were using. And there were others. There were others labels that were used by our Prime Minister. So, yeah, I think trying to portray that this was violent, that they were expecting violence, has been completely, that narrative is gone. Not even being able to point to gun, let alone no guns. So I think it's pretty clear that when these protesters were leaving home, when they're fueling up the trucks and preparing for the road, they were preparing like every other day for their job. They were not weaponizing, because they were not intending to do anything along those nature. They were planning to make the journey to Ottawa to be heard, and they were ignored. Now, we also heard some testimony here that the grievances could not have been met. I'm not as convinced about that. I don't know if the grievances required that the mandates were going to be completely lifted. I know there's a lot of talk about an MOU that had a lot of demands in it. I understand that originally it was a trucker mandate, and then it turned into other mandates. I still am not convinced that was going to be the only thing that would have dispersed this group. I think that a conversation with the prime minister, or the prime minister and a couple of officials, to sit down and talk to representatives, open on TV, stream it so all of Canada can see it, that would have been a benefit. We could have saw and listened patiently, like we're doing now for 6 weeks, to the government explain to, and they don't even have to direct it to the truckers per se. They could be to all of Canada to explain what it is they're doing. Lay it out. They don't have to dot all their I's and cross all their T's, but at least give us the courtesy of a layman's version of where they're coming from, a little bit more than we've been receiving in the press conferences and online. Because if we had proper information and we felt comfortable with it, there would be no need to go seeking it in person in Ottawa. So I got a comment here. Why raise a point about the borders? Yeah, no kidding. And again, that's not even a reason for the act. Just because you had borders, even if there was economic, it has to be severe. It has to be no other way to deal with it. We keep going back to, in order to invoke the Emergency Act, there can't be any existing laws that can be used to do that and to assist. And you're 100% correct. Even with that stated, they were already moving things and it was already cleared. I believe Coots was cleared and the bridge was cleared at the time of the invocation. They kept pointing to those two events preceding as if it mattered, but I believe they were cleared. And I also believe it was never a full blockage. There might have been a blockage at some times, but the intent, just like the emergency lanes in Ottawa, was to keep one lane open. So I know that Alberta had one lane open at all times, so it slowed down the traffic. It did cause congestion, but it wasn't a blockade. Okay. Yeah. So I'm not seeing, even at this point, with the straight shooting talking from this police officer, the superintendent, that there's grounds for the Emergency Act. It sounds like they had intelligence. They were sharing it. They had some pretty good intelligence in the way that there was no weapons other than the flurry-defined trucks themselves. There were no weapons, and there was no intent of actual violence. They did talk about grievances with the Prime Minister, with the Premier Ford, with, in general, COVID and other things. Are they trying to imply that Canadians are not allowed to have grievances and complain about issues that are being affected by the government? Certainly you can. Certainly you can. And I don't think that we should ever get to a position where we accept that grievances becomes evidence of events that will require actions that could be as extreme as using police force, police tools, and ultimately possibly the Emergency Act again. I'd like to see real events being addressed for what they are. I do know that intelligence isn't supposed to be factual. That was kind of an off comment on my part, more around, I'm sure later we're going to see other people pointing to the intelligence as if it was, in their mind, factual information and not necessarily for what it is, which is information. A lot of forward thinking, a lot of speculative information. It's a lot like reading investor documents. They're painting a picture on purpose. And it's not supposed to be factual, but it's supposed to be pretty close to what they believe to be true and accurate as far as they're concerned. And I'm hearing him say things like the purpose of intelligence is to drive decision making. I think that's going to be the cop out for Trudeau. I think at the end of all of this, he's going to be pointing to the intelligence that he received, and he's going to say, I use that for my decision making. And at that point, at that time, that was his decision based on the information. It seems to be like they're really building up a a total collapse of government, which is one of the valid invocations for the Emergency Act, an event that will collapse the government, kind of paraphrasing there, but it was meant to be, the tanks are at the door. But if the government admits on all levels of complete incompetence and that we were a big house of cards and we were very fragile, notwithstanding the trucker protest, we were at the brink already. So maybe they're going to come out and say it wasn't really necessarily the convoy trucker that put us over the edge. It would have been any protest. So if for some reason there was a protest in the middle of February for something other than the convoy, then maybe they're going to tell you we would have collapsed anyways. That would be a pretty impressive defense to build, because that defense requires you to admit to your own incompetence. So I'm not seeing that. Like, I'm seeing a couple people blaming other people for that, and they're trying to portray images that the other people were incompetent, but they were great. So, for example, Councillor Diane, her police service board couldn't do any wrong. They were doing everything right. They got the right intern chief, and they had Bell lined up, and they were making the right decision on slowly, and they don't even have to consult with other people. So as far as they're concerned, they're making all the right decisions. However, other departments weren't giving them enough information, and other departments weren't being easily accessible. For example, the mayor. Sorry, the video just came back on. It kind of distracted me there. But in either case, what we're seeing is a lot of finger pointing, where if you put the whole picture together and you listen to what they're all saying, they're all incompetent. They're all incompetent. But if you read between the lines and you look at actually what's happening, there was a lot of functioning government there, and it did work, especially emergency services in the city. I'm pretty confident that we saw testimony that it was actually quite stable. It was quite strong. No major incidents. So on a political level, they're saying things that doesn't match the services level, but we got some more testimony now. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back.
Oh, that was a marathon, but that was worth it. Oh my goodness. How many of you were super excited at the edge of your seat? I was clapping because some of the stuff coming out was amazing. He was so good. His integrity was high. His ethics were high. His detail was high. His memory was high. His recall was high. His accuracy was high. That was incredible. That was impressive. We had some decent witnesses, but this guy, Pat Morris, is it too late to rename my firstborn? Because that was amazing. I was very happy with that. No problem, Denise or Dennis. Have yourself a great night. We'll see you tomorrow. Get some rest. Yeah, for sure, James. That was epic. That could have been our Amber Heard moment. I was waiting for a moment where we were going to get so much truth that it's going to be so compelling. No extremists, no violence. He was very clear that violence was not happening. He even made comments like he was surprised and it was shocking at how little violence there was. And then he broke down 10 charges. He said 10 charges for violence, but 6 of those were from police officers who were charged. Wow. So 60% of all charges for violence was from the police officers themselves. That leaves 4 people in a group of 100,000 over the 3 weeks, however many there were. That's incredible. Okay, that's incredible. I don't know what we're going to be doing for the next 25 days now. Is it going to be a lot of digging out of this hole that it now exists? I'm very frustrated that none of his information and intelligence was making it up to us at all in the media or through officials or anything like that. It does seem like he was being silenced a bit, because he certainly did not go with the narrative, and even the witnesses we heard just before him, not even close. I did like how he was talking about the media and how he wrote all that stuff down way back when, and at the time, that the hyperbolic and over exaggeration from the media was definitely problematic. The labeling of people, okay, he used that term. He found it was problematic that somebody was labeling people without evidence. We all know who he's talking about and what labels he's talking about, en français or not. Those were just to have an emotional response from the protesters. They were definitely provoking. They were definitely trying to get more out of them. And to all the convoy participants out there, today was your day here, because you've just been vindicated over this whole narrative of extremist views, violence, fringe, etc. Never happened. We knew that. We knew that at the time. The people who were really paying attention, watching alternate media, etc. So I was really, really happy with today, and I'm sure you are as well. Yeah. Well, what if we get a better one than that too? Wow. Yeah, I'm curious what they're going to be doing for 25 days now. Diagonalong came up, so this is the first day we got that name. I was waiting for it. If you watch one of my videos with Students Against Mandate way back in September, I was doing research around Diagonalong to see what they were all about, because I didn't know about them. I didn't know about them during the trucker convoy. I didn't know about them prior to about, I would say, July or August of this year. I looked into them, and yeah, they're a meme group. They like to have some fun. They are comedy, but if you actually listen to them, Mackenzie, if you check out some of his podcasts, he's a really smart guy. He's got some good views, and but he's angry. He's frustrated. It's turned into a bit of a group who definitely wants to express their frustrations, and they're doing it non-violently. They're doing it through memes. They're doing it through merch. They're doing it through meetings. I consider them mostly harmless. So if you are a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fan, you would know that reference, which basically is the the label for Earth. It's mostly harmless. And that's what I see here too with Diagonalong. They have the potential, but any group that's frustrated and comes together has potential to do a lot of things. Whether or not it's likely that anything's going to happen, I don't think so. I think that they're well-intentioned in the fact that they're trying to troll Justin and his team, and I don't think they'll ever give Justin what Justin's looking for, which would be some sort of justification to point at Diagonalong as more than just a collection of vocally frustrated Canadians. I didn't find him threatening at all. I went through some of the stuff. I found some of it not my humor, but it certainly doesn't mean anything. Just because a bumper sticker is not something I would like, or etc., it doesn't mean anything. So I'm very, very happy that we had Pat Morris today. Very, very impressed with him. Yeah, very impressive indeed. Very, very impressed with him, and I could do more hours of him, but I guess we don't have to. So that's day 5. We're going to wrap up day 5 with, it was a marathon. We're now at 10 hours and 54 minutes on this recording. I believe my limit was 10, so I'm going to have to figure out how to get the rest of this video, but that's not my problem. Thank you very much for joining me. We had a lot of fun at the end. It was super exciting, and it might get better because we do have some more OPP officers coming up. Pat was the first one, but let me quickly go look at the list to see how many we have on the list. Craig Abrams, Ontario Provincial Police. Carson Party. Marcel. We got quite a few. Tom Creek. Yeah, we got a few. Scrolling through here. Yeah, we got quite a few. So we may have a lot more testimony throughout the OPP, which will corroborate what Pat had to say, because it does seem like the OPP did have a good organization for intelligence going. So much so that the commissioner himself was questioning why Canada didn't have this particular system in place. Excellent question, but I'm pretty sure CSIS is Canada's version. And I guess maybe the commissioner's question should have been, why didn't CSIS or Canada's intelligence on the federal level also come up with the same type of information? I think the commissioner was very impressed with it. He agreed with it. He understood it. I don't think he had any doubt that it was truthful. And at the end of the day, no matter how hard the Canadian government's lawyer tried to put words into his mouth, she just simply couldn't. Potential violence, the prospect of violence, that's just always there every day, no matter what. So you can't point to that as reasons for your Emergency Act. Nice try. Let's see what we got here. Thank you, Jason. It's a good place to express for sure. And yeah, thanks for coming, Connie. And for sure, it's a safe place. As we know, OPP and there's a lot of intelligence and stuff, and they collect social. But oh well, we're sitting here, we're talking, we're being honest, we're not doing anything bad, and I'm actually having a good time, especially at this last little bit. Check it out tomorrow. Great, James. You make sure you come. You have some excellent questions, and sorry about your cell phone bill. You did say that you're doing most of this streaming over your cell phone. I don't know if there's a audio only version or something that can help you there, but thanks a lot for the commitment to make sure you're getting all the information you can, and you're one of the informed ones. So when you're talking to your friends, you can actually tell them, hey, did you check out Pat Morris? Go check it out. And if I knew how to do those videos where they put the glasses on and stuff like that, I would do that for this for sure, because he certainly is the man. He dropped the bomb, and he dropped the mic on that one. Hey, Donald. Hey, Donald, happy, and I hope you're feeling better, and maybe in the next day or so we can squeeze you in on one of our episodes here, because your insight is also fantastic. You know how police services work. You understand how there's bad apples, and then there's also some great apples, as we just saw. No problem, Clay. Yeah, and I'm doing what I can here. It's getting late. I'm pretty tired. I don't normally sit and talk to a computer, but I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. I'm learning a lot, and thank you for all your comments. It's also helping me learn things and figure things out. So I appreciate that. And to everybody that joined me again today, thank you so much. I didn't play any music, so this stream should not be blocked from YouTube. And I'll do my best to get day 4 up as soon as I can. I am releasing the whistleblower video tonight, so if you're a subscriber, you can look for that. It's an hour, and it was the surprise guest from yesterday. It's not online right now unless you're on Rumble, but I'll be putting it up on YouTube tonight. Well, have yourself a great night. I'm going to have to get a lot of rest, and I'll see you all in the morning. Good night. Take care. And I know I'm going to feel good with Pat Morris and his testimony. Take care, everybody. Bye. And if you liked this video, remember to like and subscribe and press that notification button to receive more information like this. You can also follow me at yellowhead.vote to stay informed and get the inside scoop. Thank you.